Welcome back everybody to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry. In today's course, we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administration exam. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to mount remote file systems. Whether they're NFS or Samba, you'll find that either your desktop or your server will periodically need to mount external file systems for making file copies easier, transfers easier, or shares easier. So we'll start with NFS, and we're not actually going to mount NFS, but I'm going to show you the commands to mount NFS. First, we don't have any local NFS resources available, but mainly because NFS has been supplanted for file shares, whether it's on Linux or Unix or Windows, for a variety of reasons, security not being the least among them. NFS is more for backward compatibility for older systems and servers. But if you're on an Ubuntu system, you would run an apt-get or aptitude update for the installation of NFS-common. And for CentOS-based systems, we will run a yum install on NFS utils and NFS utils-lib. It'll go through and pull down. In our case, we don't need anything. We would go ahead and create a directory for the NFS mount. So let's go ahead and in the mount directory. And in our case, we don't have anything mounted on temp. We could do it there. But from an NFS perspective, what you would do is you would add to the FS tab file an entry that would look something like this. You would take the IP address of the server in question. Here, let's go ahead and clear this. And for example, let's say that our server was 192.168.1.150. And then the name of the NFS share, for example, would just be like NFS_share. And this is an entry in the in the FS tab file. And then we would want to put it in this case like on mount.temp. We would indicate that it's an NFS file system, leaving the defaults in place and letting it remount if the file system were to drop. And that would on boot look at the IP address 192.168.1.150, find an NFS share that would respond whether there was access available for this particular IP or server. Most NFS shares are available to an entire network, although they can be restricted to a single IP address. Then we're mounting it to the local resource mnt temp, NFS and defaults. For compatibility reasons, again, we use an IP address because sometimes the network will start before the DNS service, and you don't want the mount to fail because it can't see the IP address or the name of the system in question. So for more flexibility and for a more secure configuration, we will be using Samba. If you're using an Ubuntu system, you'll use aptitude or apt-get to install the Samba-client and Samba-common, as well as CIFS utilities. And then for yum, we're going to do a yum install Samba-client, Samba-common, and CIFS utilities as well. Once those are installed, which in my case they're already installed, I want to do a scan. Assuming that I don't know what the name of the share is that I want to mount to, I'm going to do a scan for my local server to determine what's available to me. In my case, I'll try one of my local file systems. So we're going to do a Samba client -L for list. And then in my case, I need to do a -U, -U, and my name so that it knows what to prompt me to log in for. SMB client -U tcox-L share. And it does matter the order that you put it in. You want -U tcox so that it doesn't confuse tcox with a share name. So -U tcox and then -L share is going to give me, once I put in my password, it's going to give me all of the shares on that system that are available. And you'll see there's quite a few of them on this particular system. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and mount a share called news. Now, the news share and everything in here is going to be case sensitive. So if I wanted to mount the live backup, or if I wanted to mount share with a capital S, I'd have to be sure that I use the same expected case when I pass in my mount. So I want to have a directory to mount to, so the TMP is going to be where I mount to. And then I'm going to create what's called a credentials file. And the credentials file is simply a username and password that I can use to mount that information to the directory indicated. So in my case, what I want to do is I'm going to edit or echo a username equals, and then the username that I want to use. And then I'm going to put this in the MNT directory, and we'll call it .smb credentials, which is the standard name that you might use. And then we'll echo out password, and haha, I'm not actually going to use the password that I use to connect to my server here, but we'll go ahead and add that out to the credentials file too. You'll want to make sure that we do a chmod 600. In other words, we just want read-write on that particular file, and no one else can read, write, or execute on the -smb credentials. And on the -smb credentials, then we'll add a file or add a line to the etc fs tab, but I'm going to pause here where I add the correct password to that file. We'll be right back in just a second. Okay, now that I've done that, we'll go ahead and add the entry to the fs tab. So let's go ahead and clear this. We'll vim on etc fs tab. And then all we're going to do here is let's add it to the end of the disk mounts. We're simply going to add an entry that tells us what we're doing. Now, I can do a / and then the name, but that assumes that DNS is always going to be available. So unless I've created a local DNS entry for the particular server in question, it's best to use the IP address. Although as much as I hate hard coding an IP, especially on a local network where I'm not sure about service availability, then I'll want to just put the IP address in here, since I then don't have to worry about my DNS service being available. So here is the share name and IP that I need to mount, and then where I want it mounted. The file system for a Samba share is always going to be CIFS. It's a standard network file share system, which is why we installed the CIFS utilities. Then what we're going to have to do is we have to tell it the credentials to use in order to log in, because they're secure, are going to be mnt.smb credentials. And this can exist anywhere as long as it's owned by the appropriate account and it has the appropriate permissions added to it, and you get the path right. So wherever you've installed the .smb credentials, you need to point to it from here. Then we're going to do a comma and tell it to use the file system defaults, and then to remount the file system if it drops. And then at this point we can go ahead and save the file, and then we'll go ahead and try to mount the directory. So we'll go ahead and hit escape, :WQ, and we'll save the file. If we cat out the etc fs tab file, we'll see that the file system is not currently mounted. And once we've added an entry to our fs tab file, if you'll remember, if you've already viewed the how to mount file systems, we can simply tell the fs tab file with the mount command to scan for file system labels that aren't currently mounted that are set up in fs tab, and to do so. We can do that with a mount-a. Now if we do a df-h, because we've provided the proper permissions, we can see that that particular IP and share for news is mounted under mnt temp, and if we go to the temp directory, we should see other files that are within it. And you'll see I have downloads and NZB files. This is actually where I store newsgroup downloads for the file system for videos or ISOs that I download from newsgroups. So the two file systems in question would be NFS and the Samba file system, which is mounted automatically in SF tab using the CIFS utilities. And you can see what's available as long as you know an IP address, especially for Windows, if you do a Samba client-L with an appropriate user who has access to those particular shares. Once you've created the Samba credentials, then you can add it to the FS tab and it'll mount automatically on boot. So for mounting remote file systems in Linux, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.